Being a chartered manager means that you are a specialist in that area, and it means you've got all the skills to do the job to the best of its ability.
You are seen as a leader, a true leader who has credentials behind the great work you've already been doing.
It's enhanced my understanding, it's enhanced my skill set, it's improved my mindset.
It makes all the difference.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2026 Arden Lecture in collaboration with the Chartered Management Institute. My name is Dr. Nick Wiley, and I'm the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Business and Innovation at Arden University, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all today to the session. For those of you who aren't aware or aren't as part of Arden University, we are the fastest growing university in the UK and also one of the newest, and we have an ongoing commitment to widening participation in higher education and offering opportunities to people who might otherwise not have the chance to study at degree level. This lecture is part of the ongoing relationship that we have between Arden University and the Chartered Management Institute. We work very closely together to make sure that all of our students at Arden University are really able to benefit from the range of resources and networks that are such an important part of what the CMI offers. And I'm pleased today to also be joined by many of my colleagues from Arden University and also our students, including, I hope, some of those who are watching the lecture live as part of their teaching session today. Our topic for the lecture today is sustainability in action. And at the Faculty of Business and Innovation at Arden University, sustainability, along with enterprise and innovation, is part of our DNA. Now, our strategic aim is to ensure that these three concepts, sustainability, enterprise and innovation, are central to our students' educational experience. And sustainability is perhaps the most challenging of those concepts to embed, partly because sustainability can mean different things depending on the subject that is being studied. It can also present a challenge to some long established perceptions of what a business education should involve, but also sustainability really requires us to confront our personal values and how those link to more global values. So our goal at Arden University is that our students are both prepared for the change that a sustainable future will bring, but also we want them to be pioneers in driving that more sustainable future. And that's why we really wanted to focus on sustainability in action rather than just in theory. To help us explore the idea of sustainability in action, I'm really pleased to be able to welcome three speakers today who each bring considerable expertise and insight in the area of sustainability. First, I would like to welcome May Ho, who is the founder and director of Artwich. Hello, May. May brings over 14 years of management and leadership experience across various fields. And since founding her consulting firm Artwich in 2021, she has dedicated herself to co-creating with individuals and organisations, both for profit and non-profit, to integrate sustainability into their management and leadership practices. So welcome, May. Second, I'd like to welcome Janine Campling, who is the founder of Green United Development, which promotes equitable carbon markets through innovative monitoring and carbon credit systems. I'm also pleased to say Janine is an Arden University MBA alumnus and a sustainability expert, and she's also a member of the School of Business Management and Creativity Employer Advisory Board here at Arden University. So welcome, Janine. Our third speaker is Martin Baxter. Martin is the Deputy CEO of the Institute of Sustainability and Environmental Professionals. And Martin works in the UK and internationally to accelerate the transition to a sustainable future and to support people in the development of sustainability skills and green careers. So welcome, Martin. So yeah, welcome to all of our panel members. I've asked the panel to consider 3 themes today. They're going to be, what are some of the core ideas that underpin our understanding of sustainability? What can leaders and managers do to translate some of those ideas into action? And how can individuals use sustainable values to build careers in this really important and growing area? So we're going to look at those themes in turn and hear from what each of our panel members on their thoughts. After we've done that, we will answer the questions that I'm sure many of you will have as you listen to the thoughts of our panel members. So we'll come to a Q&A towards the end of the session. So please do upload any of the comments and thoughts that you have as you hear, as we go on. So I'd like to make a start by thinking about our first theme, which, as I said, is really about what are the key definitions and understanding that we have of sustainability. I'm going to come to Martin in the first case here. Martin, I wonder if you could share some of your thoughts about what do you think are some of the key ideas and concepts that really underpin our understanding of sustainability?
Great. Well, thank you, Nick, and wonderful to see so many people joining from different parts of the world, which is really encouraging. In terms of how we define sustainability or get an understanding of sustainability, there are different ways in which it's done. I find what's called the donut economics model really useful in able to describe and paint a picture of sustainability. And it starts with providing the social foundation for people. So we all need access to water resources for hydration and sanitation. We all need food to be able to live. Nice to have somewhere to live. We're here on this lecture talking about education and development of skills and capability. We need access to energy. We need some income. So actually kind of sustainability starts with how do we provide all that within the environmental limits that we have. And our environmental limits are defined by the climates that we have. And at the moment, obviously, we are rapidly changing that climate. It depends on the quality of our ecosystems and the extent of our biodiversity, because that's absolutely critical for our food system. Depends on the extent to which we're looking after water. It looks at pollution. And really, sustainability as a concept is how do we provide all of those social foundations for everybody in the world without destroying or pushing beyond the environmental limits which we are kind of need to be able to live within. And I think why that becomes really important as a concept for sustainability is from this fancy word called interdependencies. Because we know that if we don't have access to water resources, or we start to destroy the climate, then we start to impact on people and communities, which then forces them to have maybe poorer health outcomes, or we don't give them access to jobs because actually kind of we start to displace people, and or we give them poor quality of water because of pollution, they can't drink it. So we start to then have an impact on social fabric. And if you start to do that, then you start to destroy the very things on which we depend. So those interdependencies and interconnections between our social foundations and our environmental limits are how the economy has to kind of try and work with those interdependencies if we're to create a sustainable future. Now, it becomes really challenging when you look at that macro picture that suggests that in the next 25 years or so, there'll be another 1.5 billion people on the planet. So the pressures that are coming on our environment in order to provide those social foundations are being stretched at an unbelievable rate. There's no part of the world which doesn't suffer from decaying and kind of and degrading ecosystems, and yet they're the absolute fabric on which everybody kind of depends. And so driving change, doing things differently, providing that balance between how we live as a society on a macro scale and do that within our environmental limits is the challenge of our time. And our economics are there to provide that exchange of value, not just between people, but also how we value that external environment. And frankly, it can't be working because the way in which we are not considering some of the externalities around things like environmental degradation in our economic systems mean that the things that we depend on, we are destroying. Fascinating to see that publication a couple of weeks ago, earlier this month, of the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report, showcasing the 10-year risks that there's consensus from businesses around the world, place 5 of the top 10 risks as being environment driven. It's not a surprise, but we never seem to be quite getting there to solving them because we have other short-term priorities that get in the way. The UK government was forced to publish its national security assessment of the effects of degrading ecosystems on a global and biodiversity on a global scale, and show the significant threats to UK national security from that degradation, from either forced migration, from economic impacts on different parts of the world, or a big impacts on the global food system, which then have knock-on effects. So that interconnection is really important. So that's how I start to think about sustainability and rebalance how we live, within those constraints, but also that we provide that kind of social foundation in an equitable way. I think that's a useful starting point for people to think about sustainability.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. That's a really some really interesting thoughts, Martin. Yeah, that and you've laid out there, I think, some of the really fundamental challenges. I could see you agreeing with some of the Martin's thoughts. I didn't know if there was anything specific that you wanted to kind of pick up on in terms of how you sort of approach the overall idea of sustainability.
Yeah, I would say I pretty much agree. As you could see, I'm nodding along the way. So donut economics definitely is a framework that for us to be able to understand, and for not only the government, perhaps businesses also, to be able to use that as kind of guiding principle in terms of how do we as businesses actually put together operating model that could help, being sustainable. What does that mean? So I believed what I've seen so far in the past 5 years, working with different organizations, I've seen we are progressing. We're seeing as well some actions being taken. We collect the data. We know where things are potentially. We've got some kind of guidance and principles around these things. And I guess having that, I would say, is being embedded somehow in everyday kind of operation in some of the organization, which is good to see. So yeah, definitely, I would definitely see that from a business standpoint as well. How do we operate, in a more kind of efficient way? That's how it's being translated in some organization that I worked with as well.
Yeah, great. And I think I'm sure we'll kind of come back to some of those questions about how organizations can be more efficient in I suppose addressing that tension that Martin was talking about between the social foundations and our environmental limits. Janine, again, is there anything that sort of you would want to emphasize in terms of where you come in terms of how you approach the notion of sustainability?
Well, I think Martin and May have really articulated the situation quite well. I guess I just want to add perhaps that everything is interdependent, but when you approach sustainability and you see yourself as part of the environment that you're trying to protect and conserve, that sort of adds that added aspect. Sometimes we look at it from an external perspective, and then it's really easy to then, silo the environmental, the social, and the governance aspect, people, planet, profit. But if you see yourself as part of the system, then that it sort of makes it quite clear that you have to have a really holistic approach to sustainability.
Yeah, I think there's that reminds me of I think it's a famous sort of German advertisement that says to people, you're not in traffic, you are traffic. And I think that's what you're saying. You are, sustainability is something that we live and is we're part of all of that process. I mean, I think that kind of links into a question I just opened up to any of the three of you. What do you think are sometimes the most common misconceptions that people have about sustainability? Are there things that perhaps always you find yourself challenging or questioning when people want to talk to you about any aspect of sustainability? I don't know who would like to have a go at that.
Shall I take a stab at that? For me, I found that there are two critical misconceptions really that stand out. The first is the thinking that sustainability is optional. It is not optional, it is inevitable. What is optional is whether we approach it deliberately or whether it is imposed on us eventually through crisis. So one pathway gives us a choice to design our future with flexibility, innovation, and create competitive advantage. The other arrives through resource scarcity, irreversible pollution, social instability, or regulation imposed in reaction to climate shocks, and all of the above. So the real decision is not whether organizations will become sustainable, it's whether they will lead the transition or be forced into becoming sustainable. And just very quickly, the second misconception is that sustainability can be cherry-picked. So this just echoes, once again, the messaging from Martin about interdependence. If you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these are areas to address such as poverty, hunger, climate action, to name a few, that would secure a sustainable future for the planet. If you imagine a major distribution company that negatively impacts on all 17 of the UN SDGs, and yet annually it only selects 5 SDGs to support as part of its stewardship or CSR strategy, that creates a substantial deficit over time in the negative impact that this company poses to our ecosystem. And this deficit is compounded by many other multinationals doing exactly the same. We cannot mitigate growing impact deficits by cherry picking. So, I think my message is that sustainability cannot be a menu. We have to really look at it as a unifying principle that runs through decision-making, governance, operations, and culture. So I'll just pause there.
No, that's really interesting, that idea of you can't necessarily choose the bits of sustainability that you want to choose. You've got to see that those interdependencies that Martin was talking about earlier as being critical. Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I think another one that I often see is that quite often people see or think that sustainability is a cost, or taking action on sustainability is a cost rather than an investment. And I think if you look at it in how do you secure your future, how can that be a cost? If not, it has to be an investment, because it's an investment about where you want to get to. And the other thing is that people rarely speak about the costs of not going on a sustainability journey. And so those are kind of two areas that I think are quite often misrepresented in discussions and debate around how we address this future, the challenges that we're seeing here today, which are getting more kind of bigger as we go through time.
Yeah, a cost of inaction, I suppose, would is we need to be mindful of that. Yeah. Great. Listen, that's some really great kind of ideas and thoughts to get us into this area. And I can see, I'm sure, already some thoughts and questions amongst the audience. So please, as we said, do add questions that we can come back to in a short while in the Q&A. I want to take that opportunity from where we've got around the kind of the misconceptions and the notions of the people perhaps coming at sustainability as a cost rather than investment, and turn to our second theme, which is really around what can leaders and managers do to really drive sustainability, and what role do they have in making sure organisations can deliver those sustainable outcomes. I'm going to come to Janine to help us sort of talk about this, and I know May mentioned earlier about kind of efficiency, but Janine, if I ask you, well, what do you think some of the key principles that underpin how organisations can take a more innovative approach to sustainability? What would you say? What do you think are as well the biggest opportunities for students to think about how they could create new solutions to allow a more sustainable future?
A great question, Nick. And actually, while I was doing my MBA at Arden University, I think one of the most relevant and impactful modules was one on systems theory. And I've seen in chat that some of the students have mentioned systems thinking. So I feel when you're looking at innovative sustainability, system thinking is one of the most powerful tools that you can master. To put into context, the human body inspires this concept. If you have a recurring headache and you go to a good doctor, they won't just simply treat the pain. They'll ask you, are you dehydrated? Are you stressed? Is your posture affecting your neck? And examine the whole system to get to the root cause. And business is identical. If you think of a company as a living system comprising of strategy, operations, supply chain, people, governance, all interconnected, systems thinking with a sustainability lens shifts the question of how do we reduce emissions? How do we even start becoming sustainable? It shifts that thinking to how do we redesign this entire system for efficiency, resilience, and responsibility? Just going back to what Martin said about, sustainability being an investment. So I think, the biggest opportunity there is really looking for inefficiencies and systems that are fragile or misaligned, and then finding, innovative ways to sort of optimize those. And it's not because sustainability is a niche, but it's because most systems were never designed for long-term resilience. So therein lies the opportunity that you can actually innovate while thinking about sustainability. I will just pause there to see if anyone else has comments on and thoughts on this.
Yeah, I don't know, May or Martin, if you wanted to offer any other further thoughts on what Janine's started off. May, were you going to say?
Yeah, maybe I will talk a little bit about the circular economy kind of in action. We probably see more and more organizations talking about that, and also providing some kind of reporting in terms of knowing where things are, whether or not they are repairable. I know that in the phone industry as well, we've seen some other brands like, maybe Fairphone, for example, they're kind of having good ideas in terms of having a phone that could being used for, extended years, not only from a software side, but looking into, the parts, how could we only change the parts? So we could see organizations are kind of thinking about these things and how to make them happen in the industry. So which is really good to see, but then obviously there are more to do. We are not there yet in terms of thinking everything as, as I think we still, as businesses, we're still struggling to, in some ways, move away from that short-term gain, from making a profit from, obviously it's important to make a profit too, because you kind of fund jobs and fund, R&D activities and things like that, which is also important. So it's like finding that fine balance as well. So that's what I wanted to really highlight.
Yeah. Martin, would you develop that any further?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so to me, it's about at what point do you have maximum impact? And generally that's at the point of design, because at the point of design, you have choices. And how you exercise those choices, whether it's about materials and where they've come from, how that product might be used in practice, the way in which it might be used, might be manufactured, everything is open at that point. And as soon as you make decisions on those products, or the way in which you're going to define a service, then you start to lock in, not just you as an organization, but others in value chains, either kind of your supply chain or in your customer base. And so I think that process of design and how you embed this thinking, not just in products for sustainability, but all products need to be sustainable, is probably where you can have the biggest impact.
Yeah. May, I wonder if I could come to you, sort of perhaps if I know you work with different organisations, in this area. Have you had experience of those who have really had to kind of confront that tension that you were talking about between, we need to have the short term focus on sort of bottom line profits with the long term sustainability, and who are trying to engage, as Martin was talking about, getting sustainability into the design. Have you seen that those tensions play out with some of the organisations that you work with?
Yeah, I guess in the past 5 years, we've seen, the sustainability kind of field, I would say, from kind of growing and hiring a lot of people, focusing on the kind of strategic side, into right now we are kind of focusing more on, perhaps like in the past 2 years as well, like focusing more on, it's great. We've got a lot of data right now, carbon footprints and things like that, right? How do we kind of translate that into useful insights to inform the business? So I guess, having heard from sustainability leaders or managers or people who are actually analyzing the data themselves, they are trying to see where, what kind of role they could play further, maybe within a business. So often, some of the time, sustainability people, they might be working with procurement teams, they might be working with a lot of different business leaders. So it's more around how do they coach internal teams in terms of understanding what do they bring to the table. I think it's pretty much more around speaking the same language, really. I feel like some of the departments might be asking, so what does that mean to us then, if we reduce our carbon footprint? So for sustainability leaders, I would say what they probably may struggle a little bit around that is to interpret, to tell that story internally, if that kind of makes sense. So I feel like the kind of, when I worked with organizations, with training or like training needs or capabilities, training is often being talked about as well in terms of how do I tell that story? How do I be the advocate? How do I get people to be a champion of that as well? And how do we speak that business language as well to help us to get to where we needed to? So that's what I would say for now.
Yeah, Janine, you're nodding. Have you seen that? Have you had that experience as well?
Yes, plenty. But I think there are excellent examples available today on how sustainability can actually be profitable. So look at the US. The US has taken a U-turn on sustainability under the current administration. And yet there are sectors that will not unravel their sustainability credentials because they are simply too profitable. If you look at real estate, green buildings command higher rents, higher occupancy rates because they're energy efficient, they weather resistant, they have lower risk profiles for investors. This is a sector that has successfully applied systems thinking to sustainability. Instead of going green because it was the right thing to do, developers ask, how do we design buildings that tenants want, that cost less to operate, that won't be susceptible to degradation? And so if you apply that systems approach in various different cases, you'll find that there really is, and that's the whole point about sustainability, it's about longevity. So you'll find that it is probably the most profitable in the long term. And you can see that on a macro and a micro level. And I feel that this is a real competitive advantage. When companies and sustainability leaders recognize that sustainability strategy is not simply to meet policy compliance or regulation, but that it's actually an opportunity to transform for profitability, to lower costs, for higher returns, and to reduce risk. So policies and regulations may change, but if you actually have a systemic systems positive approach, it's actually a business case that won't change, and that makes the most sense.
Yeah, because we may look back and at sort of what we're doing now, even or recently, to consider just the inefficiency with which resources were used and overused, and what I think you're saying is that actually, a sustainable future is a more efficient one because it does more with less in many respects, and that is often the route through to profitability and to successful organizations. So it's as you were saying earlier, Jenny, not optional, but part of where we see organizations going. I think that's really interesting. Can I just come to a sort of a specific question that one of you may want to pick up? So at Arden University, we've recently been recognised as one of the champions for the UN's Principles of Responsible Management Education, which is very closely linked into to ideas of sustainability, linked to some of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that you were mentioning earlier, Janine. So, is it possible to talk about what distinguishes a responsible manager or a responsible leader in terms of their kind of approach to some of these issues that we've been talking about around sustainability? Is there a typical set of characteristics that you might see in a leader or a manager who's embracing some of these ideas? I don't know if anyone feels the best place to answer that question.
I'll have a go. I mean, I think there are a number of characteristics, and we talked about systems thinking, being able to see that big picture. I think relatability is really important as well, and authenticity. So if you and somebody who can really draw on the evidence base, so cut out, if you like, misinformation is really important as well. So start to kind of make decisions and bring people into that decision-making process in a way that brings multiple perspectives, and actually recognize that this is complex. And so quite often, and ultimately it's about change. And driving change requires courage and sometimes being bold. And I think that's what we need from leaders. And that's very, very different than being reckless. So kind of make sure that we make that distinction. But I think, leaders who are able to bring all of that together and use that to set direction and recognize that there will be bumps around in the road, there always will be, but be kind of fairly clear-headed on that, I think are really important characteristics.
Yeah, great. I think that's some really fantastic advice and sort of guidance for many of those who are listening. So thanks for that, Martin. I think that also leads us clearly into the third theme we wanted to talk about was how do we combine those ideas of sustainability we've talked about personal values as well as those leadership values that Martin was talking about, and notions of employability. And I want to come to May, if you can share us your overall thoughts. Obviously, we've got many students who are watching this. So I wonder if you can say, what do you think are some of the core values that you would expect to see in those who really want to build a career in sustainability? What are some of the things that you think are must-haves for anybody who wants to go into this area? What sort of things are organisations looking for if they want to bring people in to work in the area of sustainability? Perhaps you could just talk through some of your thoughts around that area.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Martin highlighted, it's all about change, isn't it? And obviously, as sustainability leader, we have to probably look into, there might be some legislation change. There might be some changes in the wider kind of system that we are in. So it's very important that as leaders, we kind of know where we are and what are the changes and what do we do with the changes, right? And also how do we kind of understand the complexity of these systems and how they are interconnected. So what I mean by that is how they are kind of linked and often being intersect with, for example, if we're looking at the supply chain, there are so many things that touch us together, and there are so many kind of different relationships that we're dealing with. So it's not a simple fix, right? And we kind of need to figure out how do we make an impact. And also when we are leading change, I feel like a lot of people, like sustainability leaders or managers or analysts talk to me around, okay, how do I bring everybody together, right? And how do I actually bring everybody to this journey? So I think it's more around understanding where our stakeholders are, what they are thinking really, and to be able to get them to, convince them and influence them and bring us together in a way, and prove them that it's worth doing. And I think it's really important skill set moving forward. Obviously, one of the key research that I've done in the past when I kind of did my dissertation for my master's was that I looked into how leaders, or how in general people who are passionate about sustainability being able to self-regulate or self-help or self-care, because literally throughout the change or the journey of change journey, we probably would have seen a lot of like frustrations, right? We have to face it, right? Not everything would be like how we wanted to lay out. So one of the important things is that I've looked at how mindfulness probably may help leaders to step back a little bit and rethink about what could they be improving or remove them from the stressful situation. So a lot of leaders actually, when they first started leading a team or putting together, they had no idea potentially where this will lead to. So that's uncertainty is something that leaders are constantly dealing with. And yeah, so I would say those are the key things I would say students probably may wanted to look into, is that how do we resist to change? How do we actually help ourselves to self-regulate, to self-care, and to kind of not put ourselves into a well-being kind of loophole of at risk of thinking of some extremes or something like that. How to help ourselves, understanding the interconnectedness of things and of the system itself. That's what I would say, really.
Yeah, which is the point Janine was making, and Martin talked about that systems thinking. You need to be, to be willing to kind of approach any of these areas or the in your future career to look at them, throughout. Look at how the interconnectedness of those things are. I mean, those are quite sort of challenging. They're they're really important values and things we would want people to take into this area, but perhaps quite daunting. I wonder, Martin, or in your experience, what how do employers look for those sorts of things? What do you think do employers are trying to get at, to kind of capture those people coming into the workforce that can demonstrate those types of skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we come across a lot when we speak to employers. what we find is that you often have this mismatch between, on the one hand, many students will have a lot of knowledge and understanding around sustainability. They don't really have much idea about how to get things done in an organization. And an employer has got lots of kind of insight into how a job needs to be done. And what they need is people who can understand how to get things done. And it's kind of bridging that gap. So one of the things we've developed is something called the Sustainability Skills Map, which tries to provide a route through for people to what is it that you need to know and understand about sustainability. I think anybody who's going to be involved in this needs to have that knowledge, and things are changing rapidly, so keeping up to date with that is really important. Secondly, some of the tools and the principles, so whether it's, we talked earlier about design for the environment, life cycle assessment, management systems, the whole kind of set of things like that, and other principles such as the precautionary principle that kind of frame how things are done. But then it's also building up those analytical and systems thinking skills, your communication skills. You've got to be able to engage with everybody in the organization at different levels, in different roles and functions, in order to motivate people and inspire them. So those kind of transformational skills and transition skills, helping you to become a change maker, are really important. And often you either get lots and lots on the skills, but not on the technical kind of insight, or you get lots on the technical and not really those kind of business-ready skills which organizations desperately need. So I think it's kind of building those together that will then give an individual a sense of agency. Because picking up on May's points around, these are big challenges and they are complex and they are deeply embedded in our systems that we're trying to change. And it can be really despondent. People get really despondent and anxious and concerned. And so giving them the tools to have agency, to see how they can make change that can make a difference, I think is a really important role for not just employers, but also education and wider society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it is organisations like the CMI which offer opportunities for networking and for support to share the despondency. Sometimes that might help. But yeah, I think that's a really powerful thoughts there, Martin. Jean, I don't know if there's anything you would add in terms of the things that when it comes to getting into sustainability as a career, what are the things that you've seen or that you would look for in people that you would want to work with in this area?
Sure. I have 2 points. The first, sustainability as a career, you could be sustainable in any discipline that interests you. So, once again, going back to the systems approach, if you map out the system, the ecosystem that you're in, or the project, look at the stakeholders, what is the upstream, downstream impact, just train yourself on how to identify connections and interdependencies and, measure those impacts. Is something causing a detrimental impact to another aspect of that system? So that is quite a very, very key way to sort of develop a skill, which I think employers would really be looking for. And then secondly, I think as a sustainability leader or sustainability practitioner, we can all have different ideologies. We can all be sustainable. You don't need to buy into the net zero, ideology, which I do, but it doesn't matter. We all need to form part of our future. We all need to work together. So even if you don't believe in climate change, or you come across a colleague who doesn't believe in that, there are some common grounds that everyone really would feel passionate about. It's irrefutable. Oceans are polluted. Soil is depleted. Our major agricultural regions are at risk. There's inequality. Resources are scarce. And in fact, food security tipping points are going to impact us globally before we even reach the 1.5 degree threshold that dominates the climate transition debate. So there are many, many opportunities for meeting that common ground and influencing and bringing people along the sustainability journey. We can all be driven by various different motivations. So I think that is really what can inspire and sort of help us evolve, as a people when we think about sustainability, whether it's in business or in social aspects. So that's my two thoughts.
No, it's great. I mean, I think, yeah, and all of you just inspiring, being recognizing the challenges. None of you, this isn't to anything to, this isn't an area or work to be involved in for people who aren't committed, who aren't willing to kind of live those values, but also be prepared for dealing with the complexity and the ambiguity, but also the need to have that effective communication to build the narratives that May you were talking about. I'm sure people listening in will be, already really excited to hear your insights. I'd like, if I can, to turn to some of the questions that we've had coming in. And we also had some of those, and thanks to those who submitted some questions in advance. I'd like to start us off with a question that we submitted by Stacey in advance. Stacey asked, how can we tell if employers or companies are simply badging what they do as sustainable, and that really it's just a tick box exercise? Easy for me to say. I don't know, May, if perhaps that's something that you might be able to talk about. Have you seen that? How can you tell if this is if companies, employers are genuine in their commitment to sustainability?
I guess it's very important if we could just look at what they presented in the reports. That's what I will first look at before I make an assumption potentially that they've done a tick box exercise. I probably will look at whether or not they set science-based targets, and also whether or not in the report they use buzzwords, eco-friendly. What does that mean, right? So I guess it's more around looking at the data. What do they report into, and whether or not they could prove that they've done something? Because I think one of the key themes that we came up here is the impact, right? So we wanted to understand if there is evidence to support these kind of claims. So that's what I would be looking into. And also, I probably will also look into, the board, the executives, whether or not they are incentivized through their kind of policy, how they get paid, how they get their bonuses, whether or not there are some goals in relation to sustainability. So that's probably, people will probably go after a little bit more if they're kind of tied into that. That's what I will be looking into, whether or not ESG targets, for example, once they hit it, will they get any bonuses or something like that? That's probably, they could say beautiful words in saying they're committed, but then we need to look at their progress. We need to look at how mature they are, because some of the organizations are only starting, right? And different organizations may have different maturity, and also looking into their metrics.
Yeah, that's great. It's all the building on those themes. It's not it's how it's part of the system. It recognises the interdependency. Organisations are doing those things, and you see that in all their activities. That's great. Thank you, May. We had another question submitted in advance from Naomi. I wonder, Janine, perhaps you could help us with this one. How do you balance sustainability with the needs of diversity? Are those two things, are those part of the interdependencies, or is the need for diversity the offering opportunities to all? Does that pressure on being sustainable in different ways, or what's your sort of response to that?
That is a great question, and something I feel quite passionate about. Going back to the point of cherry picking, environment, social, and governance. It should be interconnected. So you cannot be sustainable if you do not support diversity, or if you're not inclusive, or you do not promote participation. Sustainability is not simply about climate. It's about our environment, and we are part of that. So the social aspect is part of that, and that means our mental well-being, our emotional well-being, and also the way we value each other as human beings. So unfortunately, when we look at sustainability as emissions transactional, which many companies really focus on emissions and footprint, and it's easy to forget about the social aspect, that's when you will find examples of detriments. I work in the carbon space. While people offset with carbon credits, those carbon credits in the nature space cause huge detriments to indigenous populations. Now we are learning, and we're sort of improving the sector and methodologies, but that is a learning curve, where we have learned to sort of look at ESG, the triple bottom line, as a unified principle rather than individual.
Yeah. Which
Can I just come in on this? Because I think it's really, it's really important. I talked about, sustainability starts with that social foundation, and that, and everybody has to have a voice in how we develop in a way which is sustainable. And so diversity and sustainability are fundamentally intertwined. And I think the more that you can draw on diverse perspectives into your to inform your decision making, the better solutions that you will find, because you won't be only developing solutions for part of the problem or with part of the of a constituency in mind. So I think it's bringing different perspectives into that in a way which then allows people to develop solutions which are kind of genuinely holistic and kind of intertwined and deal with these kind of the bigger system, because they'll have more, you'll have more insight, and therefore you make better decisions.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I think that's So I think, Naomi, hopefully that answered your question. Is that it's these things have to be balanced. They're intertwined and interconnected, as we've heard so often, I think, in today. There was one question that I think came in today on the chat, which I think might be just interesting to get some thoughts. It probably opens up into a whole other hour's worth of panel discussions. It's around the question of artificial intelligence. So we've had so I can't say the name, but how should a CMI trained manager balance using AI to optimize efficiency, which we've talked about, against often the massive energy consumption that AI itself requires? I don't know if one of the three of you has a particular view around where do we see the interconnection and the interdependency between AI and sustainability. Who'd like to
maybe I could jump in.
May, yes.
I guess there are twofold. The first aspect that I would say is whether or not we like it or not, if we use those big brands, even with search engines, AI is being embedded. Yeah, so it's already there, and it could be running in the background that we couldn't really see. So we probably, if we wanted to know whether or not those search engines or those kind of like efficiency tools that we're using, if we wanted to look at, how they are being built and things like that, but there probably some reporting around it, because they're probably like big players in the field. So that's from the IT side. But if we are talking about how sustainability leaders or managers or analysts being able to use AI to be able to understand the patterns, to be able to understand where the gaps might be, there could be opportunities, because obviously the way that organization used to work, analysts used to work, is basically spend a lot of time doing these things. I'm kind of like on the side of, well, it's there. Can we utilize it? So I would like to, well, I think organization could help, like people who built the AI could help us to understand the footprint. I could see in the chat as well, there has been some conversation around, the carbon footprint per inquiry, or how different models might be different, right? So one of the key thing I believe in the IT space has been talking about the green AI. That is the model optimization and things like that they're looking at, because depending on what kind of software you're running, it kind of depends on how much energy is being required, right? And also, as we are transitioning into renewable energy, we kind of know where the energy is coming from, right? But I'm not saying that we should use as much as we can. What I'm suggesting is that, yes, we kind of know where we are in that stage, but I could see definitely benefit in terms of understanding, using AI to understand patterns, using AI to perhaps help us to recognize patterns that we may not be able to see. It could be from a different lens, or even being able to see, navigate complexity in the, for example, maybe in the supply chain, where the gaps might be. How do we actually put together actions? I would say from an analysis point of view could be helpful.
Yeah.
And I could see more organization using it. Yeah, go ahead.
That's
Sorry.
cool. Yeah, Martin or Janine, some brief thoughts, or
Yep.
do you have a similar view?
Well, go on, Janine.
Oh. So, well, I think from a systems lens, if you actually map out the impact of AI and you look at more than just the emissions, the footprint, AI actually contributes to sustainability in a social dynamic. It gives access to healthcare, promotes inclusivity for aging populations, makes many services accessible, bridges the social divide in education. So I think it's also important. This is a great example of how you need to look at things holistically. Yes, we've got the footprint to address, but we also have innovations to address that. And then if you look at the benefits that it has on the whole system, I think it sort of counteracts somewhat. I'm more of an AI supportive, positive supporter. So, Martin, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of examples where AI has allowed us to generate significant efficiencies in our energy system, whether it's in transmission networks, which generally are over-engineered and over-protected, so you can get more energy down the transmission grid. If you have real-time monitoring of conditions, and you can bring that into decision-making, which means that you don't have to build as much infrastructure. The way in which we're going to be utilizing energy in smart systems, whether that's, the solar on your roof, the battery that you have, the vehicle that you might be driving, how all of that interrelates, that can really optimize the way in which our energy system operates to reduce peaks, and therefore we don't need as much total generating capacity. So there are kind of things like that. And then you see now, Network Rail sticking kind of high-powered cameras on the front of their trains so they can survey lines for ash dieback. So there's kind of lots and lots of different utilizations. And then it's not just the energy consumption and the carbon associated with that, but it's also water resources. And here in the UK, all parts of the country, kind of looking out the window and it's hammering it down with rain, but are going to kind of be in drought restricted, kind of real slight water shortages in all parts of the country by 2050, unless we do something different. And then layering on top of that, significant users of kind of AI and data centers and using our water resources. But actually, it's also helping to drive solutions as well. And the innovation that comes with problems that need to be resolved, particularly if they are kind of big tickets issues, then actually you can utilize the resources of those organizations to kind of drive change as well. So, the AI genie is out of the box and we have to kind of deal with it because I don't think we're going to put it back in.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, I thank you for those answers, and thank you to everybody who submitted a question. it's on me as the chair of the panel that we haven't managed to get through all of them, but I'm sure you'll agree we've had the sort of the thought and the detailed insight of our panelists is such that that we've really, I hope, I've certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure that goes for others as well. So it just leaves for me to say a huge thank you to May, to Martin and Janine for being part of our panel today. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate the insight that you've brought and the very thought-provoking comments that we've had. We've heard such important things, I think, about the interdependency, the interconnections around sustainability, the complexity, the ambiguity, the need for. We've touched on wellness, we've touched on AI, we've touched on diversity. We've really, through sustainability, we've captured some really important and fascinating insights that I hope will benefit all of those who've listened. So yeah, a huge thank you from me to all of our speakers today. Just a reminder for everybody to check out the CMI's latest reports, Leading the Pathway to Net Zero, as well as some of the CMI's new sustainability leadership qualifications. So please stay tuned to hear a bit more about the CMI membership. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and to our panel members. Thank you.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.